If you're a business with a strong connection to history, education, travel, or place-based storytelling, and you're looking to reach an audience that values those things, we should talk. You can reach me at john.summers@summersmediaenterprises.com. Now, let's get back to our story. Okay, so today I have the pleasure of interviewing someone that I came to Alabama planning to look for when I came down. One of the things that we're doing for these two podcasts, of course, I'm talking about the Tennessee History Nerd and the Dauphin Island Diaries podcasts. The plan is to, where possible, I'm going to have those to coordinate. And so for episode 1 for Dauphin Island Diaries, I will be doing Fort Gaines. It'll be the Complicated Story of Fort Gaines will be the title of that. And then corresponding to that, for the Tennessee History Nerd that will be released that same week, we'll be doing a podcast on Admiral David Farragut. And have with me today Mr. Paul DeHaan. He is one of the experts on Admiral Farragut. He's written books on him, has a number of memorabilia. He does a lot of collecting of Civil War memorabilia, and has a number of things that are actually on loan here at the Dauphin Island Welcome Center Museum. And I want to, before I fully introduce him, I do want to preface by saying we are doing this interview in a public place. So it will not be like it would be in a studio. You will hear voices in the background. You may hear loud noises from time to time. For that, I apologize. Part of the hazards of using a public place for an interview venue. But Mr. DeHaan, thank you so much for giving me of your time today.
You're welcome, John. I've enjoyed collecting for probably going on 50 some years now, and I've been very fortunate to be able to own and handle, and we are only caretakers of artifacts when it comes to collecting. But I have, for the last 30 years, I've probably specialized in Admiral Farragut and his flagship USS Hartford. And so that has been my passion for collecting. There are Civil War shows around the country, just like antique shows, and we'll set up at different venues and put our wares out for sale or displays. And my wife and I have been doing Civil War shows mainly east of the Mississippi for probably 35, 40 years now.
So I find it interesting. You live in Michigan.
Yes.
Are you a Michigan native?
I'm born and raised in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Kalamazoo.
Southwest Michigan. My wife also, but I did not serve in the Navy. I just met a fellow who was slightly younger than I was, probably when I was about 20 years old. He'd been collecting since he was 12 years old.
Oh, wow.
And saw that there was still the original artifacts were available. He took me to a couple of Civil War shows, and it wasn't long that the hook was set, and the collecting bug just reeled me in.
And there's probably a 12-step program for that somewhere.
Well, yeah, there's. I tried in 2014. I sent the bulk of my collection to auction and in Ohio, and unfortunately for me, I saved about 12 to 25 items, and and so the collecting bug never really left. So we sold the bulk of the collection in 2014, but I'm still collecting now.
Okay. Well, and I will say, having been in this museum, we are beneficiaries of that as well, because several of the things that are on display here you have loaned for that.
Yes, it was probably about 4 years ago. Jim Hall, who was the director of the Welcome Center Museum, and they have some wonderful things on Dauphin Island and the lighthouse on Sand Island. But Jim and I got to talking about the Civil War, and I told Jim if he could get the town to buy a case that we could secure things in, I would bring things down and put them on loan. I would help them buy reproduction things, and which he did, and we selected the 21st Alabama Infantry, who were on Dauphin Island. They occupied Fort Powell in the Mississippi Sound. They were at Fort Morgan. About 800 surrendered at Fort Gaines. They were also in Point Clear, the hotel in Point Clear, which is now the Grand Hotel, was a hospital during the Civil War, and many of the patients there were from the Vicksburg campaign of 1863. So, and the 21st Alabama had about 40 men who served as hospital stewards and guards at Point Clear.
Okay.
But the museum here, we really developed, like I say, in about 2021, I was able to buy some representative Confederate uniforms, canteen, infield rifle. There are some original reunion badges. There is an original gavel that was taken from they call it the surrender tree. The Alabama troops surrendered on May 4th, 1865, up in Central Alabama, about 20 miles north of Mobile.
Okay. And so for our listeners who may not be familiar with the Welcome Center, I know that we've talked about this in some other interviews we've done, and notably with Miss Connie Roan, who was a teacher. But this was the Little Red Schoolhouse.
Yes, it was.
And this is a really, really neat. I mean, they've been able to preserve this building. It's now on the National Register of Historic Places. So it's being preserved and it's being used in a way that is representative of life on the island. And one of the really cool things I'll tell you, I mean, you think about a welcome center, I think about these places on the interstate when you stop off at a rest area and you go in and there's a few brochures there and they're welcome to our state, whatever that state is. This, of course, has that, but it's a lot more than that. There's a ton of information in here about the history of the island. And so when I began working on the podcast, there are two places in particular that I started at. This and Fort Gaines are the two places that I've started, and both of them have a lot of information about not just the battle, not just the Civil War, but life in general on the island throughout the ages. And the Welcome Center here, I've just heard somebody talking about something I bring up in the Fort Gaines episode that is part of what is The locals call it Petit Bois Island, Petit Bois Island, over off the coast of Mississippi. Used to be the western end of Dauphin Island. In 1717, that was split in a hurricane or a big storm there, kind of like the Katrina cut later,
Yep.
but on a much larger scale, actually. So, you know, the things that Mr. DeHaan has provided or has helped to curate here really help to tell a significant section of that history. So for people who are hearing this, I would tell you, if you come to visit Dauphin Island, don't do like I did and stay a whole time, you know, your whole vacation and never even visit the Welcome Center. Start here, because there is a lot of stuff here that tells the story of the island. I want to ask you a question. This is kind of where I was asking when you told me you're from Michigan. I grew up in Middle Tennessee. Tennessee was second only to Virginia in terms of number of battles fought. I grew up immersed in Civil War history, and my mom was a history teacher, so I grew up hearing all that stuff. And of course, part of the, you know, growing up as, you know, being, I'll say, immersed in the lost cause narrative. If your idea of a good weekend includes a fishing rod, a boat, a campsite, and a Tennessee sunset over the water, then you need to check out Birdsong Resort, Marina, and Campground. Located on scenic Kentucky Lake on the beautiful Tennessee River, just 9 miles off Interstate 40 at exit 133, Birdsong is conveniently located halfway between Memphis and Nashville. Family-owned and welcoming guests since 1961, Birdsong is now operated by the second generation of the Keast family, and whether you're looking for cabins, full-service RV sites, primitive tent camping, boat rentals, boat sales, fuel, bait, or easy lake access, Birdsong has you covered. Be sure to visit the Tennessee River Freshwater Pearl Museum, where you'll find Tennessee's official state gem, the freshwater pearl, and learn how the freshwater pearl industry brought worldwide attention to this part of Tennessee. To start planning your getaway, visit birdsong.com or call 731-584-7880. That's birdsong.com or call 731-584-7880. Birdsong Resort, Marina, and Campground. I think you'll be glad you went. And when you call, tell them Big John sent you. Michigan, there were no battles fought there.
There were no battles fought in Michigan. We did send our state's share of men for the war, but my interest has developed primarily through the collecting. If you get involved in Civil War history, there's really two aspects. One that I'm into is the collecting, the other is reenactments. Mm-hmm. There are reenactments across the country that celebrate the annual battles. That's a whole separate field. They are very proud of what they do, and they do a lot of preservation work. But I decided I did not want to wear a wool uniform in 90-degree weather in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania on July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd.
Or Resaca, Georgia.
Resaca, Georgia. Yeah, but it is a strong field. They do a lot of historical events, and across the bay at Fort Blakely and Spanish Fort, Mike Bunn, who is the director there, is doing a fine job of promoting the siege that took place for Mobile. The problem with Mobile Bay, you look at the bay and all of its water. It's about 30 miles from the entrance to the bay up to Mobile. But there's only about 4 miles of good water.
Navigable water.
That is because Admiral Farragut's large ships drew 16 and 17 feet of water. you get north of a 4-mile mark, and you're in 6 to 12 feet of water. Like my brother who is a sailor says, what a waste of good water.
Right.
But that was very effective defensive-wise for the city of Mobile, because Farragut could not get his fleet near enough to the city in order to fire his cannons at it. It was also early in the war, in 1863, that Farragut tried to come up the Mississippi Sound. There again, because of shallow water, he could not get within 2 miles of Fort Powell, which guarded the Mississippi Sound entrance into Mobile Bay. And that was one of the few battles that you could say that Farragut lost.
Right.
And that was primarily because they could not get close enough to fire their cannons.
Right.
And
those Dahlgren guns, I'm assuming that's what you're talking about, the Dahlgren guns that were on the Chickasaw, that they had, if I remember, a range of somewhere north of 3,000 yards. That's roughly 2 miles,
Yep.
but that's it.
And that's it. And they were also loaded on smaller boats. And once you get a boat rocking, it's hard to take aim with a 6,500-pound
Sure.
gun.
Well, it's hard to take aim if it's moving around with any size gun. But
Right. Yeah.
So I think that one of the questions in my mind, of course, you've talked about your interest in the Civil War. The avenue for that came through collecting of memorabilia and artifacts. Why Farragut?
Well, I was a general collector for probably 3 years. And then I realized I couldn't own one of everything. And so I've always displayed it in our home. My wife has been very generous of allowing me to sneak into what would have been our formal dining room, became a Civil War room. Paintings moved into the living room. So we are collectors of early American art. So that directed me into a general field. But once I realized I couldn't own it all, and I felt I had to specialize. Like I said, we would go to Civil War shows, and the vendors would bring like a Confederate uniform out, and there would be a feeding frenzy. As long as you had it in your hand, trying to make a deal with the vendor, you controlled the situation. Once you put that coat down, the fellow standing right behind you, he moved right in. And I decided if I needed that kind of pressure, I would stay home and work. So I took, over a 6-month period, I took all my Army stuff, traded it or sold it for Civil War Navy, General Civil War Navy, and I became a Navy collector. Then in 1993, we sent our daughter off to college, and I had to specialize even further. So that's where I decided Admiral Farragut. I had some nice signed photographs of Farragut, had been able to purchase his cufflinks, which had his initials engraved on them, and his flagship USS Hartford. I was able to purchase a model of the Hartford that was owned by Franklin Delano Roosevelt
Oh, my.
at one time,
Who had been Secretary of the Navy
who was Secretary of the Navy
before he was president.
and then President. And he envisioned a museum, a naval museum featuring the USS Hartford, the ship from Manila Bay, and a World War I destroyer.
So the Olympia.
Yes, the Olympia. And unfortunately, when President Roosevelt passed in 45, his dream also passed. And the Hartford was built in 1858, was still with us in 1956.
Oh, my.
It lasted 98 years. Unfortunately, it was in 1952, Congress passed appropriations for funds of $2 million to restore the Hartford. But when it went to the House of Representatives, it was time for them to vacation for the summer. So
they controlled the purse.
that bill died there. So in 1952, actually, the city of Mobile made a bid, and they wanted to buy it, but they got opposition from the Sons of the Confederacy.
Because
Because it's a Union ship, you don't bring that into Mobile and make a shrine out of it. But they made the offer. But in 1956, it was in Norfolk, Virginia. It was at its mooring. It was decaying. They had to pump water constantly out of it. And they came in on a Monday morning, and the pumps had failed, and it had sunk. You could still see the upper part of the ship. But unfortunately, they decided to scrap it. And Charles Spencer of Norfolk, Virginia, bought the salvage rights. He towed the Hartford up to his salvage yard about 2 miles upstream. For one thing, he flew a First National Confederate flag on the back of the Hartford that he had, which I owned at one time. I was able to buy from Charles Spencer a number of artifacts off of the Hartford at that time. I still have a few of those artifacts. But he pulled it up, he salvaged what iron and steel and electrical wires he could, and he pushed it up on shore and burned it. What a sad day for such a proud ship.
If you enjoy the stories we tell each week and would like to show your support, I'd like to invite you to check out the Summers Media Enterprises merchandise store. You'll find shirts, hats, mugs, stickers, and other items featuring both the Tennessee History Nerd and Dauphin Island Diaries. This month's featured item is one of my personal favorites, our I Break for Historical Markers bumper stickers. Whether you're the kind of person who can't drive past a historical marker without pulling over, or you simply appreciate a good piece of history, it's a fun way to let everyone know you're always on the lookout for the next great story. To browse the entire collection, just visit the link in the show notes or visit the Summers Media Enterprises website. Every purchase helps to support the work that goes into researching, producing, and sharing these stories each week. Thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting our podcasts. And now let's get back into the story. And we see we see that over and over again. I mean, the Constitution is the exception to the rule
Yep.
in that regard.
Yep.
I was just yesterday in Mobile. I was riding the Perdido Queen cruise to go see the United States, and it's going to be in a way a similar end.
Yep.
If things don't change. It looks like it's headed to being the largest ever artificial reef.
Yes.
And again, a tremendously proud ship. And there were, like what you were talking about with the Hartford, there were decision points where had you gone a different direction, the end result would have been very different.
Yes. So it's a evolving situation, but Admiral Farragut spent his entire life in the Navy. He was in 1862, in July of 62, they created the rank of Rear Admiral. He was the senior one of 12 that were made Rear Admiral, but then later the rank of Vice Admiral, and he was our first Vice Admiral in 65, and then in 66 he became our first full Admiral. So, and then in 1870 he passed away up in New England. New York had a funeral procession for the Admiral down Broadway Street in the rain, and it drew about 10,000 people. Admiral Farragut also was a pallbearer at Lincoln's funeral. So, the Democratic Party tried to get him to run for president. He had no interest in politics, and by that time, having spent 5 years in the Gulf, his health was not good, and he suffered a couple of heart attacks in '69 when he made his tour out west, and then on coming back east, in Chicago, he suffered a heart attack that he never really recovered from. So.
Okay.
Yep.
So what I'd like to do now, if we may, I'd like to contrast him with his the leader of with Buchanan at Mobile Bay,
okay.
because up until the beginning of the war, their paths were largely parallel.
Yes.
And Buchanan was not a slouch. He was a very experienced sailor, a very well respected leader in his own right, the founder of the Naval Academy,
Yep.
And were things. So he followed Lee's example and resigned his commission in anticipation of his home state seceding, which did not happen because he was from Maryland. It was a border state that did not secede. And he chose then to go back in the Navy, and the Secretary of the Navy basically told him, "You're a traitor, I don't want you."
Very true. Very true. Buchanan was, of course, he was on the CSS Virginia. He was injured there. He was commander of the CSS Tennessee at Mobile Bay. He was injured there, almost lost his leg, but the Union surgeons said, "No, I think we can save it," and they did. Buchanan, from a collecting standpoint, is a very interesting, hard to find artifacts, or you can find some photographs of Buchanan in his Union pre-war uniform. I have owned about 3 photographs of him in his Confederate uniform. At one time, I owned his telescope that he used on board both ships, and I have some nice photographs of the CSS Tennessee at Mobile Bay. But he's an interesting fellow from that standpoint, and basically after the war served out a very quiet life.
So, but going into from the standpoint of the battle, would you say that it's probably safe to say that from a skill standpoint, from an experience, expertise standpoint, they were evenly matched?
They were evenly matched. Unfortunately, Farragut had
he had a lot more guns, had a lot more ships.
He had 200 guns, where Buchanan had about 8 guns on the Tennessee. The other 3 ships were gunboats and carried maybe 2 or 3 apiece. Buchanan fought basically a defensive war where Farragut was, damn those torpedoes.
Yeah, aggressive. And
we're moving in. And it was Buchanan, once Farragut got past Fort Morgan and gathered the fleet, his fleet, in Mobile Bay, they were sitting down for breakfast when Buchanan, all by himself in the Tennessee, and his 6 or 8 workable guns, basically attacked the Union fleet. And those were the days where wooden ships really came to an end. Their guns could not hurt the ironclads. Ramming was about the only opportunity that they had, and it was only a design flaw on the Tennessee where their steering
rudder
chains were
Yeah.
exposed. They were shot, and the smokestack was shot off, and so they couldn't develop steam, and so they had to pull up the white flag at that point. He was a gutsy old buck.
And so, you know, but I mean, you look at both admirals, both of them.
Oh yeah.
I mean, Farragut coming in, and I have said, and I believe this to be true. I don't know how you feel about it, but had even a fraction more of those torpedoes functioned as intended, we might today be talking about Farragut as a reckless fool rather than as a bold, daring commander.
Very much so. Although, in his defense, he planned, and they almost nightly would go out and check on the torpedoes and see the status of them. They felt quite sure that most of them were waterlogged and not functional. But that first one sure
Did the Tecumseh in?
made a blast. The Tecumseh was the ship to go down that really started right at the start of the battle, and if it wasn't for Farragut's aggressiveness and his confidence that the torpedoes were pretty well not going to function.
And leadership to hold everything together, because everything, they just all started stalling right in front of the guns of Fort Morgan at that point.
Yes, they did. And Fort Morgan could have, if given the time, taken out all of the large ships. And you know, the fact that Farragut was not going in on his own. I mean, we one of the things that I've talked about earlier in the week down at Fort Gaines, Granger had already landed in advance of Farragut coming in. He had already put Union troops on the island to the west of Fort Gaines, and honestly, at that point, Fort Gaines was doomed. I mean, with what Granger had
there was no way that even without Farragut, Fort Gaines could not have held out.
No.
But what Granger would not have been able easily to do without Farragut's support is the advancement after that.
Yes. Yeah, the advancement of Granger, his whole story of coming onto Dauphin Island, they had to literally take the cannons off of their transports and carry them through 5 and 6 feet of water to get them up on shore, and then move them through the sand to get up to a stable grassy area. Then eventually the next day they moved behind Fort Gaines, and they had cleared out about 1,200 feet of wooded area. So Granger was in the wooded area. There was 1,200 feet of open space between him and the back of Fort Gaines. And so Fort Gaines was really surrounded at that point. And once Farragut came into the bay and the battle took place, we have reports that most of the troops in Fort Gaines and Granger's men were up on the shore watching the battle going on. They knew that their end of it, with the pilings going out from Fort Gaines into Mobile Bay and Granger behind them, Fort Gaines never really stood a chance.
Well, as a Marine veteran, one of the things that really stands out to me is you have miles and miles of beach to land on, and the fort was cleverly designed, much like the defenses at Singapore were in World War II, facing out to sea.
Yes.
And everything behind them was unprotected. I mean, there was some protection behind them, but it was never intended to defend from someone coming across the land behind them, and that to me was a fatal flaw, because Granger landed with a large force, but not an overwhelmingly large force.
No.
Had they stopped them at the landings, because they were trying to bring those big guns ashore.
Yeah.
But once he was ashore with those Parrott rifles, there was no
real stopping
right
of him. And that's like the city of Mobile on the west side was strongly defended, one because it's swampy area, but they built about 3 trenches of defense on the west side of Mobile. Mobile was a large railroad transport going to the interior along with the rivers. It was an important port for the South to maintain for their goods going into the northern lands of Alabama and Georgia.
It was a hub in a lot of ways, much like Atlanta was as a rail hub, and Chattanooga.
Yep.
And so, and for people who are World War II types of folks, this would have been much like what was going on in Bastogne. Bastogne, 5 roads in, 5 roads out. It was a hub. So it was when you can control a hub, you control the ability logistically to handle. And there's an old saying that amateurs study tactics, professionals study logistics, and so the South logistically was already from the get-go. They had to win the war quickly.
Yes.
When they did not win the war quickly, they were already behind the 8 ball because of logistics.
Right. Yes.
If you enjoy the way we tell stories here on the Tennessee History Nerd, there's another show you might want to check out. Dauphin Island Diaries. Same approach, different setting. Stories from the Gulf Coast, rooted in place and built from the sources up. You can find it wherever you're listening right now. And now, back to our story. So going back to Farragut, it's interesting, and you cover this in your book, how a young man born in the hills of East Tennessee, he was born in Campbell Station,
Yep.
right outside of Knoxville, how he ended up as the premier naval officer of the United States. And that's an interesting story. I'm not going to ask you to cover that whole story, but if you could cover maybe a few high points, I think.
Well, it's very interesting that Farragut's father was a sailing master, and he came from Spanish descent, came to the United States, volunteered and fought in the Revolutionary War, consequently was rewarded some land down in New Orleans area. Actually, they own 900 acres near Pascagoula, and he went down to New Orleans on an assignment from the U.S. military. The Farragut family, the mother, the 4 children, were on a raft with their cattle and their chairs and their belongings, and a guide who took the flatboat down the Mississippi. And so it's very interesting that a young Farragut, James Farragut, at that time, was his
That was his birth name. Yeah.
And he was to travel down the Mississippi at that young age, and then 50-some years later, return up the Mississippi as far as Vicksburg, and so. But their family was down in the New Orleans area, and his wife took care of Captain David Porter, who became ill, and the 2 families kind of bound together, and Mrs. Farragut died at the same time that David Porter did, and so the Porter family, for their thanks for working with their father, and so was willing to take one of the children in, and
Who were now motherless. And for the father would have been a challenge trying to raise all those.
Yes, and William Farragut, the older son, was in the Navy, and James liked the look of the uniform, and he volunteered, and one of his sisters went with them, and they became part of the Porter family. And James, for his thankfulness, he took the name of David, so he became David Glasgow Farragut, and the rest is history.
Yes, it is. So I want to be respectful of your time. I do appreciate so very much. Before we close, I've been doing this with everyone else. I'm going to do it with you as well. I'm going to take a page out of Dan Rather's book. One of the things that he likes to ask is, what have I not asked you that I should have asked you?
Oh, well, that's a very good question. We have covered a lot, I'll say that. It has been an honor and a privilege to hold the original artifacts of the Civil War, realizing that they are still out there. Since I did my book, I've been collecting probably the rarest and most appreciated pieces of history that I've owned are Rear Admiral David Farragut's shoulder straps.
Oh, wow.
And I had known of their existence in the collecting field for 10 to 12 years, and they finally became available through a Atlanta dealer, and he called me and said, "Paul, I've got these. You should have them," and I did.
Well, congratulations on that.
I made the jump, and like I say, I've been fortunate to have exhibits along with the Union League in Philadelphia. We've done exhibits there. We did a number of things with the Mariners Museum. And it's just been an honor and a privilege to be a caretaker. And that's what we are. We are caretakers, and we move things along.
Indeed.
And it's been a large part of what I have done the last 40 years or so. And it's been in my retirement, it's been my go-to. If I'm not playing golf, I'm researching some Farragut USS Hartford, Mobile Bay related items, and I search constantly for auctions, and just in this past year I've been able to purchase a photograph of the CSS Tennessee and a portion of the flag from the CSS.
Well, I will
Tennessee.
want to talk to you again because, to give you some background, I started out to do Tennessee history. Mm-hmm. Grew up in Tennessee, have been in love with my home state all my life. There's so much there to see and know and yes. learn. And my mother was a history teacher, so I come by it honestly. But then when we came down here, all the connections, Farragut, the CSS Tennessee, the Hunley.
Yep.
H.L. Hunley was from Gallatin, Tennessee. All and the Hunley sea trials were out here in Mobile Bay. So,
right.
So there's so much connection there. And even now, when you look at, you were talking about the route that they took to New Orleans. They would have come down the Tennessee River, taking it all the way around to the Ohio, and then across and down the Mississippi. You don't have to do that anymore because you get on the other side of most shoals, you get to the Tom Bigby Waterway, and you can come straight down to Mobile now. So there's that connection that, you can go all the way from here to Knoxville and never set foot on land if you don't want to. There's just so much connection there between here and Tennessee, and it's really amazing to me how much there is. But when I get to do something on the CSS Tennessee, which will be at some point in the future that I do an episode on that for the Tennessee History Nerd. Also, this is going to be for the Tennessee History Nerd for Farragut. I want to talk to you again.
Okay, we can do that. We've been wintering on Dauphin Island for 22 years, and we're here for about 10 weeks from January until mid-March.
Well, you can call me Paladin. Have recorder will travel. I don't mind going to Michigan if I need to.
Okay, very good. Very good.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It's been an honor and a privilege for me to get to talk to you. Having read not all of your book yet, but part of the book, and already knowing that will be a significant source of my information that I do on this episode. I really appreciate the work that you've done in putting all that together. That's it's obvious. It's a labor of love for you too.
Yes, I wish that more collectors would specialize and then make a record, a booklet, a book of what they have collected for other people, for the next generation.
Whether I ever have the first piece of memorabilia or the first artifact, what I really want to make sure that I take care to curate are the stories.
Yeah, very good, yes.
The stories.
Yeah.
Because I don't want those to die with us when our time here is gone.
Yes.
It requires that someone preserve those. And that's kind of what this is about for me.
Well, it's been my pleasure, John. So I've enjoyed doing this, and hope to talk to you again.
I hope so too.
Very good.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Hey, this is Big John Summers, and I want to thank you so much for listening to the Tennessee History Nerd. By the way, if you enjoyed this episode, I want you to know that there's a lot more content waiting for you out there. We're adding new episodes every week, and we're working our way across the whole state of Tennessee, covering stories from prehistory all the way into the 20th century. So if you like Tennessee history, there's already a catalog of stories out there for you to explore. So scroll back through those previous episodes. You might just find something you weren't expecting. And again, thanks so much for listening.